So, intergenerational effects and the residential school experience. Are families experiencing violence in more than one generation? Already covered some of that.
What I'm learning is that many of our younger generation have no clue who they are. Identification is a major issue amongst our people, and especially because many of them come through the foster home system and adoptive home, and they're trying to find out who they are. And we're also mixed and blended heritage, and we should be proud of all of it, not just one component. And then some of us look, because of our complexion, we look different, and that affected me throughout my whole childhood while going to school. So obviously it's going to affect the child today. If we happen to be fair complexion with blue eyes, we probably can get away with it. But then again, we are denying part of our heritage, and we should instead be instilling a sense of pride in the child who is of mixed heritage and accepting them.
Why do you think there is intergenerational abuse in the community?
It's, in addition to the addictions, also the behavior of having been a victim. And when we are victimized, we then take on victims. The oppressed become the oppressors. The abused become abusers. And I think there's enough scientific evidence today to that effect. And it's far more dramatic with our Aboriginal people across the country, because many of us come from isolated areas. And we still come from isolated areas, even in a small city like Prince George. We live in our sort of in a cocoon, in a separate neighborhood, which becomes known as the poverty zone. And even today, you and I may look okay, but we're still living below the poverty level. We still cannot go beyond that poverty level, mainly because we just lack the means. And that also becomes the scene of violence, because we're still trying to cope, and we don't know how to cope. So if we are going to undertake our healing journey, we have to be spiritually balanced and learn to cope. We have to quit being victims. We have to quit being victimizing others, and we now have to take control of not only our own situation, but we have to take control collectively to rid our communities of violence. And I believe we can. In this generation, we can do it, because many of our people are now educated, they're now experienced, they've suffered the abuses and have now become the healers and are becoming more spiritually balanced in many different ways. And I think we're on our way to a good healing journey.
So has the residential school experience had a multi-general effect, or can you tie in the residential school experience with the many things you've already talked about?
Yes. My two brothers were in residential school. My parents took them out of the residential school, and after my parents were hounded by the missionaries, the game warden, the police, and the Indian agents. And my parents lost their Indian status after they took my brothers out of the Indian residential school, because then they had to go to public school. Because they were being mistreated, they weren't being fed. And so my parents went up there, and at that time it was very expensive to go great distance to the isolated residential school. And so those two brothers, even though they were of quieter nature, there was a lot of internalized violence, of trying to cope with what happened to them. Then, while I was growing up in an extended family, the foster my foster siblings went to Indian residential school. And every time they came back, there was that whole ugliness for a week or two. I'm saying a week or two because I was quite young then, so I don't know. And then when they were getting ready to go, it was terrible, state of anger and frustration of what they had to go back to and what they returned from. And it took them a while to adjust to an idyllic setting, I would say, in a bush. And when they came up to the bush, they were fine. But it was going to and from that institution, and they've led very fractured lives. Very fractured. And it impacts their children, and the fractured life is now in their grandchildren. Very sad when you learn about your own relative sleeping on a bench in a park, when your own family is homeless, and when I ran into my own relatives in the jail. Very sad.
You have, at some points, already been answering this question, but what do you think could be done to break the cycle of multi-generational abuse?
Getting to know who we are, know our self-identification, deal with those different abuses of not only sexual and incestuous relationships, but the addictions related to alcohol, drugs, and gambling. Getting to help, asking for assistance. The biggest block we have is asking for help. And I struggle with it today. I think I'm okay. And until somebody mentions to me, wondering how I am. So someone always has to point it out. And then I seek help. Or else if it manifests in my physical ailments, then I know something is not right. So we have to break the cycle with trying to work together instead of putting people down. And we have to recognize everyone's attributes, and we don't pay enough attention to the attributes. It's easy to focus on people's negativity, but we do have to become positive.
I noticed on the page of questions you have a few notes. Do you want to, and then you have some just other notes. So it's just a time to add anything you think you would like to have added, because I know I've been kind of directing you along this direction.
Well, I celebrated my 36 years of sobriety on Tuesday. And sobriety is what brought my family. First of all, the alcoholism brought my family to its knees. And sobriety is what raised my family out of the ashes. And ashes is a healing process. So a fire is always healing. So those ashes are really important to us, and it's also healthy. So my whole family sobering up, my parents and 5 brothers, is what has made not only our extended family sober, but the community, the surrounding communities also sobered up. And it took my brave parents to do it against immense ridicule and intense negativity, because they couldn't see someone doing well and then getting on with their life. And that's one of the biggest criticism I have within our own community. Sometimes we always like to drag people down. We can't see them being a success, and that has to change. It's an attitudinal thing. I wrote that it's really important to know who I am, and so I need to know my full heritage, and I'm of mixed heritage. My healing journey has to be really crucial, especially in the urban area. Many of us come here for jobs, and we have to be able to have a healing community and be spiritually balanced within our healing community within the urban area. Many of us just can't go back to our traditional areas. It's not there anymore. and we can't go back to the bush. We'll be trespassing on private property. And so we just can't go back. Somebody else has a license to it or a permit. And so we have to make our own spiritual nest within the urban setting. And that's the only way we're going to heal. And I believe today, one person can make a major difference with much support. You don't want to hear about my other 10 pages.
Just totally just take a minute to take a breather and look through anything that you think.
Well, the only thing I want to say is no government should tell us who we are. I supposedly became an Indian on one of those Bell C-31s. And so I became an Indian in 1986, and I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't know what to do with that. All it gives me is a plastic card that saves me a few bucks with my medical benefits. But the rest I pay and pay income tax on it, so I don't get any freebies under the Indian Act. We live in an urban area. So the importance is, I don't pay attention to that Indian Act definition. I pay attention to how I grew up in the bush with Soden, and I'm also mixed heritage, so I pay attention to that.